I'm posting this from a burner because, well, obviously. I don't know if this belongs here or if it's better suited for some darker corner of the internet, but I've been carrying this around for years and it's starting to rot something inside me. My name isn't really William. But for the sake of this, let's pretend it is. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. Petty stuff at first, lying, cheating, manipulating people when it suited me. I used to justify it by telling myself that everyone bends the truth a little to get ahead. That it's not really wrong if nobody gets hurt. That was before I learned how powerful information really is. Before I realized that secrets, especially the kind people are desperate to hide, aren't just leverage, they're currency. Weapons, even. This story is about the first time I crossed a line I can't uncross. The first time I didn't just take advantage of a situation, but engineered one. Carefully. Intentionally. And the worst part? At the time, I didn't feel like a criminal. I felt smart. I didn't wake up one day and decide to become the kind of person who weaponizes secrets. It was gradual, like most bad habits. At the time, I was working a low-level IT support job at a mid-sized logistics company. Nothing glamorous. Resetting passwords, fixing printers, pretending to care about people who only remembered my name when something broke. But that job gave me something more valuable than respect: access. I could see things most employees couldn't: internal emails, shared drives, archived messages. At first, it was just curiosity. You tell yourself you're checking for issues, but really, you're peeking behind curtains that were never meant for you. That's when I noticed him. Senior management. Clean reputation. The kind of guy who shakes your hand too firmly and smiles just a little too long. And buried in a thread he thought was deleted was something that didn't match that image at all. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because of what I found, but because of what I realized I could do with it. I wish I could say I closed the file and walked away. That I had some moral reflex that kicked in and stopped things before they started. But that's not how it went. I kept reading. At first, it was disbelief, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't meant to understand. The emails weren't just unprofessional, they were compromising. Not illegal on the surface, but damaging enough that if they surfaced publicly, his career would take a hit he wouldn't recover from. And that's when the thought showed up. Quiet. Almost casual. This has value. I didn't act on it right away. I let it sit, like a dangerous idea you pretend you've dismissed. But it lingered. It followed me home, sat with me while I ate, whispered while I tried to sleep. I started rationalizing. He's not a good person. People like him get away with everything. This isn't hurting anyone, it's just balancing the scales. Looking back, that's the moment I crossed the line. Not when I did something. When I decided I could. Once the idea took hold, it stopped feeling like a question and started becoming a problem to solve. I didn't think of it as blackmail, not at first. In my head, it was just leverage. Something I could use if I ever needed to. But if quickly turned into how? I started paying closer attention at work. Not just to him, but to the systems, the logs, the blind spots. IT people aren't supposed to exploit weaknesses, we're supposed to fix them. Turns out, understanding how things break also tells you how to make sure no one notices when they do. I mapped out access points. Learned which backups were monitored and which weren't. Figured out how long deleted files actually lingered before disappearing for good. And I practiced being invisible. Clearing logs without raising flags. Moving files without triggering alerts. Small things, harmless on their own, but together they built a kind of safety net for what I was planning. That's when it stopped being curiosity and started becoming a plan. There's always a moment where planning turns into commitment. You can pretend you're just thinking things through, but eventually you either stop or you act. I acted. It started with copying the emails. Not just a screenshot, those can be dismissed, called fake. I exported full threads, metadata included. Dates, timestamps, routing paths. I wanted it to be airtight, something that couldn't be waved away if it ever surfaced. Even then, I told myself this was just precaution. Like saving receipts. Nothing wrong with that, right? But I didn't stop there. I created duplicates. Encrypted them. Stored them in places that couldn't be easily traced back to me. Personal drives, cloud accounts under names that weren't mine. I even tested access from different networks, just to be sure everything worked the way I expected. It felt methodical. Controlled. Safe. That illusion lasted right up until I wrote the message. Because once you reach out, there's no pretending anymore. Writing that first message took longer than anything else. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I knew exactly how much depended on getting it right. Too aggressive, and he'd panic. Go straight to legal, maybe even IT, and then everything I'd done would unravel. Too vague, and he'd ignore it, write it off as spam or some half-baked phishing attempt. So I studied him. The way he wrote emails. The tone he responded to. The kind of language that made him engage instead of shut down. It felt less like intimidation and more like persuasion. I kept it short. Told him I had information that could damage him professionally. Included one small, undeniable detail from the emails, just enough to prove I wasn't bluffing. Then I gave him a way to respond anonymously. No threats. Not explicitly. Just implication. I remember hovering over send for a long time. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been for something that, on the surface, looked like just another email. Then I clicked it. And everything changed. After I sent the message, everything slowed down. Not in reality. People still walked past my desk, printers still jammed, phones still rang. But inside my head, it felt like time stretched thin. I checked the burner inbox constantly. Every few minutes at first, then every few seconds when I thought I heard a notification. Nothing. That silence started to mess with me. I went from confident to paranoid in a matter of hours. What if he'd already reported it? What if IT was tracing the message right now? I started second-guessing every step I'd taken, every precaution I thought was airtight. Then, late that evening, it came in. One reply. No greeting. No signature. Just, "What do you want?" I remember staring at those 4 words, feeling this surge of adrenaline hit me all at once. Not fear, at least not entirely. Something sharper. More electric. Because that's when I knew it had worked. He believed me. And now, I wasn't just someone with information. I was someone in control. That reply changed everything. Up until then, it had all been theory, plans, precautions, rehearsed scenarios. Now it was real. There was another person on the other end, reacting exactly the way I'd predicted, and somehow, that made it more intense. I didn't answer right away. That was part of the strategy. People reveal more when they're left waiting, when uncertainty starts eating at them. I wanted him unsettled, not defensive. When I finally responded, I kept the tone controlled. Calm. Almost professional. I told him I wasn't interested in ruining his life. I just wanted compensation for keeping certain information private. Even typing that word felt surreal, like I was playing a role I didn't fully recognize yet. He pushed back at first. Asked questions. Tried to downplay what I had, like maybe he could call my bluff. So I sent another piece. A little more revealing this time. The shift was immediate. His tone changed. Shorter sentences. Fewer questions. That's when I realized something unsettling. He wasn't negotiating anymore. He was complying. Once he stopped resisting, things moved faster than I expected. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It made everything feel more fragile, like one wrong move could collapse the whole situation. We agreed on terms without ever stating them too directly. That was intentional on both sides. He didn't want anything written that could be used against him, and I didn't want to spell things out in a way that could come back to me. Payment wasn't as simple as I'd imagined either. I had to think about traceability, timing, patterns, things I'd never worried about before. It stopped being just, get money, and became this complicated dance of minimizing risk. The first transfer went through late at night. I remember refreshing the account page over and over until it finally updated. When it did, I just sat there, staring at the number. It didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy. Because in that moment, it wasn't hypothetical anymore. I hadn't just threatened something. I had followed through. You'd think that once the money came through, the hardest part would be over. That I'd relax, disappear back into normal life, pretend none of it ever happened. That's not how it works. If anything, that's when things started to unravel. He became unpredictable. Messages at odd hours. Questions that weren't part of the agreement. At first, it sounded like paranoia, him trying to confirm I hadn't shared anything, that I wouldn't in the future. But there was something else underneath it. Desperation. And desperate people don't stick to plans. At the same time, small things at work began to shift. Nothing obvious, no alarms, no accusations, but subtle changes. Access logs being reviewed more often. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. IT policies suddenly being revisited. It could have been coincidence. But once you start looking for signs, everything looks like one. I found myself double-checking everything. Then triple-checking. Sleeping less. Thinking more. Because for the first time, I wasn't just managing the situation. I was reacting to it. It didn't fall apart all at once. There wasn't a dramatic moment where everything crashed. It was smaller than that, quieter. I got careless. Not in some obvious, movie-style way. I didn't leave files open or confess to anyone. It was a pattern thing. Timing. Repetition. The kind of detail you only notice if you're specifically looking for it. And someone was. A colleague, quiet, methodical, the kind of person who actually enjoys digging through logs, started asking questions. Casual at first. Framed as routine checks. But there was an edge to it, like he already had a theory and just needed confirmation. I played it off. Gave normal answers. Even helped him look into the very anomalies I'd created. But I could feel it shifting. That sense of control I'd been holding on to? It started slipping. Not gone yet, but unstable. And the worst part was, I didn't know exactly what he'd found. Just that he'd found something. And sometimes, uncertainty is more terrifying than being caught outright. He didn't report me. Not immediately, anyway. That almost made it worse. Instead, he asked me to sit down with him one afternoon, framed it as needing a second pair of eyes on some irregularities. Logs, access timestamps, file retrieval patterns. All things I knew too well. We went through them together. He never accused me directly. Not once. But the way he paused at certain entries, the way he let the silence hang just a little too long, it was deliberate. Like he was giving me space to say something without forcing it. I didn't. I stuck to the script. Technical explanations, plausible scenarios, even suggested a few possible causes that conveniently steered away from me. He nodded. Took notes. And then, right before we wrapped up, he said something that stuck with me. Sometimes it's not about proving what happened. It's about understanding why. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like he already knew. After that conversation, everything felt temporary. Like I was moving through a version of my life that hadn't caught up with reality yet. Nothing happened right away. No HR meeting, no sudden lockout from my accounts. I kept showing up to work, answering tickets, pretending things were normal. But the pressure didn't ease, it built. The messages from him, the one I'd targeted, stopped completely. No more late-night questions, no more nervous check-ins. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe he'd decided to trust that it was over. Then I considered the other possibility. Maybe he'd taken it somewhere higher. I started preparing for the worst. Cleaning up anything I might have missed, going over old steps, trying to find gaps before someone else did. But the more I looked, the more I realized something uncomfortable. You can't fully erase intent. There are always traces, patterns, decisions that don't make sense unless someone connects them. And if someone is connecting them, then it's already too late. It didn't end with handcuffs or some dramatic takedown. No one burst through a door. No flashing lights. Just a meeting invite. HR, security, my manager. That was enough. They didn't lay everything out at once. It came in pieces, questions first, then inconsistencies, then details only someone with deeper access could have known. By the time they showed me the compiled logs, the timelines, the overlaps, I understood. They didn't have every detail. But they had enough. I didn't confess outright. Not in some cinematic speech. But I stopped fighting it. There's a point where denial stops being strategy, and just becomes noise. I was terminated that day. Escorted out like someone fragile, or dangerous, I couldn't tell which. There was talk of further action, investigations, next steps. Some of it followed through. Some of it didn't. In the end, I avoided the worst-case scenario. But not the consequences. Because losing the job wasn't the real cost. It was realizing how easily I'd become someone I wouldn't trust myself. It's been a few years now. Enough distance that I can talk about it without my pulse jumping, but not enough to forget it. I didn't go to prison. No dramatic ending. Just a quiet series of consequences that reshaped everything. Finding work got harder once questions started coming up. Trust, real trust, became something I had to earn in smaller, slower ways. But the part that stuck wasn't the job or the money. It was how normal it all felt while I was doing it. That's the part people don't talk about. You expect crossing a line to feel obvious, like some internal alarm will go off. It doesn't. It feels gradual. Justified. Logical, even. Until it isn't. If there's anything I'd say to someone reading this, it's this. The moment you start treating other people's secrets like tools, you're already in dangerous territory. It doesn't matter how smart you think you are or how controlled the situation seems. You're not managing it. You're changing yourself. And that part doesn't undo as easily as everything else.